Hook's Newsmaker starts now.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker. Since President Trump took office, the southern border appears to have been virtually shut down. But deadly fentanyl is still pouring into the United States. Where's it coming from? Katarina Schultz is an independent investigative journalist who may have better information than any reporter on this subject. She has extensively covered the border and built sources within the drug cartels in Mexico. She's the host of Borderland Dispatches. You can find her on Substack. Katarina Schultz joins me now on Newsmaker. Great to see you.
Thank you for having me.
You do this at great personal risk. You're only 24 years old. How worried are you about your safety doing this kind of work?
You know, I have always known getting into this work that there was a risk that came with it. But I choose to do this because I truly believe in the pillars of democracy, and free press is a major one. And I've always believed in the power of storytelling and journalism. And people are very concerned for my safety. But I am not the story, and I'm not the person to be concerned for. The people who I'm talking to who are living this war on drugs, the cartel violence day to day, these are the people that I feel for. And if that means putting myself in danger to give these people a voice and to bring their stories to light to the public, that's all that matters.
Have your parents had a chat with you about this and said, is there some other line of reporting you could do?
My family is very supportive of the work that I do. They know that I would not do anything else. I've always wanted to be a hostile environment reporter, let's say it, telling the stories from the front lines that a lot of people perhaps wouldn't dare step foot into. And so I have overwhelming support from them. Of course, they become concerned sometimes when things go a little askew, but we all understand the risks that are part of this.
You're aware that I think more journalists are killed in Mexico maybe than anywhere in the world. It's a dangerous environment you're in. And I'm just curious how you dove into that environment to do what you do and gain the access to some really unsavory people.
So I've always been very intrigued by organized crime and these sort of transnational politics and organized crime groups that have been operating for decades. And so this was something that I always knew I would cover. Now, getting into it, I had to really work hard and take a lot of no's and a lot of rejection to gather the sources that I have today, whether that is in organized crime groups or authority figures, people in politics. And there have been moments where those sources have completely left me, high and dry. But for the most part, a lot of these individuals are willing to share their stories and certain information, and I work very, very hard. My number one priority is to protect my sources, because in doing that, not only am I protecting the integrity of my journalism and the people who are willing to talk to me, but I also protect my personal safety by ensuring that no one is revealed.
You must realize, and I'm sure you do as a journalist, that, if they're telling you things, they may want you to know things. And why would that be? What is the message that they may want to come back to America, the Trump administration, the DEA, whoever it might be?
I think them chatting with the press, especially someone like me, I'm not tied to a particular news outlet. It's a culmination of showing their power and their stronghold. It's kind of like a game of catch me if you can. And it's coupled with putting out a message to their adversaries. And now this is a little complex because as a journalist, you have to ensure that the story that you're putting out isn't PR for these organizations. But sometimes the story that they want out acts as PR for them, but it's also useful to informing the public.
Got it. So, okay, so they're flexing and they're showing muscle, not only to the U.S. about how powerful they are, but their other adversarial cartels.
Of course, yeah, it's both.
Okay, let's talk about what you know. Since you've taken a deep dive into this, Do you believe, number one, that Mexico really wants to stop this? Because my understanding is now the drug trade in Mexico is the 5th largest employer in that country.
It is. It's extremely lucrative. And unfortunately, I believe that if the Mexican federal government really wanted to put an end to the drug cartels, they have the means to do it, and they would. Unfortunately, there is such a high level of impunity and corruption that goes very far up the hierarchy. And that just means that there are people in positions of power who are supposed to have integrity, yet they're profiting off of organized crime, and it completely deters anyone from taking any risk to end these guys or to at the very least decrease these illegal operations.
Do you believe that the Mexican border right now, we'll get into Canada because that is the next frontier and it's already happening, but do you believe the Mexican border with the United States is secure?
I think it's certainly more secure than it was a year ago at this time. If we look at official numbers,
yes,
we have seen border crossings and seizures go down significantly. These are historic drops in the statistics. And then also, in speaking with people in organized crime who operate at the border, they have explicitly told me that operations have been taken back by a lot because there is so much heat at the southern border that it's not worth the risk. In terms of like coyotes, people illegally crossing the borders, they are seeing less demand, and also they have scaled back their operations. And then in terms of drugs, that has been scaled back immensely due to high levels of authority on both sides of the southern border. So additional Mexican troops and then additional CBP and any other technology or enforcement that the U.S. has deployed.
We heard during the height of this at the border that the human smuggling had outpaced the drug smuggling in terms of a moneymaker for the cartels. Do you buy that?
I don't think that human smuggling in the long term, if we look at the big picture, makes more money than drug smuggling, because there is just generally more global demand for drugs than there is for crossing into the United States. It's very lucrative. But if I were to give you the top three, first would be drugs, second would be human smuggling, and third would be crude oil theft, crude oil smuggling.
We haven't even gotten there yet, but yes, that is something that I was not aware of, that the cartels are tapping into pipelines and stealing oil. They've gotten into all kinds of enterprises.
That's been going on for decades before I even started covering
I just never
this,
really heard about that.
I mean, it was certainly headlining in Mexico. I'm just not entirely sure to what extent mainstream and the U.S. was, reporting on this. But there are a lot of American citizens who are involved in it. They're the owners of independent oil refineries that are knowingly purchasing stolen crude oil. We just saw the case of a family from Utah get busted for this. And I think that it's really important to keep in mind that a lot of American citizens are funding the cartels through these illegal avenues, which is allowing for them to profit off of these illegal operations.
No doubt. They've been recruiting on social media. They've been recruiting Arizona kids to run drugs, and there are more people willing and able to do it than you'd imagine. Well, you would. You know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me ask you, you talked about Mexico being complicit in this. Would that go all the way to the top to President Sheinbaum, who's been in office about a year?
Yes, and I've spoken about that before. I think that when you have a president who's part of a party that has known political figures in that party that are operating for, with, or side by side with members of the cartel or profiting off of it, it's impossible for me to say that, oh, a spoiled apple doesn't ruin the bunch, because we have seen the Mexican president explicitly defend individuals who have very blatant cartel ties. And I think if she and her administration were serious about a crackdown, these people would be thrown out, these people would face consequences, and they certainly wouldn't, she wouldn't be coming to their defense on a public platform.
The President, Trump, has been, pretty outspoken about trying to stop this fentanyl scourge. Designating the cartels terrorist organizations, will that make a difference? And do you see a point where we might start running special ops into Mexico to break up some of this stuff?
So the main point of the FTO designation is really to target the financial pipelines of the cartel on both sides of the border. And I think it's in theory, it's very effective. Now, in practice, we've only seen so far, I want to say, about 2 people. I know the one first case was a woman in El Paso who was straw buying and trafficking grenades and arms. She was the first person a couple weeks ago to be charged with material for aiding a foreign terrorist organization directly with the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. Now, this particularly affects cross-border operations. Do I think that the FTO designation will lead into, tier 1 operators from the U.S. on American soil? It would really have to come to an extent where we're not seeing any progress at the southern border or any progress with the cartels and their leaders facing legal consequences for something like that to happen. So I think the circumstances would have to be very dire for us to see special operators over there, because Mexico doesn't want that. And so if Mexico doesn't want that, it would be considered an invasion. And I don't think the U.S. would do something like that, especially to a country that logistically is literally their neighbor.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I get that. I guess the only thing I quarrel with would be, you saw what we did in Iran. Those strikes were just done with impunity. And I think if we wanted to go into Mexico and do surgical strikes on labs, cartels, leadership, we could probably do it and maybe even pass it off. Somebody may think, we may want this outcome to say, oh, it was a rival cartel that did it.
I could certainly see that happening. And I think that if, there was an instance where the U.S. is conducting operations in Mexico, we likely wouldn't know that it was the U.S. conducting these operations.
Interesting. Yeah, the U.S. wouldn't claim responsibility, probably.
No, and I think that to an extent there are so many adversarial cartels operating that they would be fine with even just claiming for something that wasn't them.
Can I just, before the break, and we're going to get into where the fentanyl is going now, because there's a lot of evidence it's moving to the northern border of Canada, a 5,000-mile border that's virtually unprotected. But I want to ask you before the break, just kind of a personal question. When you're dealing with these cartel people, you're 24 years old, and it reminds me of dealing with mobsters back in the day. These are some of the greatest people you'd ever meet. You just would never want to cross them.
Certainly. I mean, that's exactly why I protect their anonymity, because if they're trusting me with information that they know is newsworthy, and I'm, in return, giving them my word that no one's going to find out who's telling me this and where they're located, there is a sense of mutual understanding. I'm doing my job, you're doing yours. I don't judge you, and thank you for this information. I'm here to inform the public. I'm not police.
Katarina Schultz has gone into the belly of the beast, into the cartels in Mexico. When we come back on Newsmaker, we're going to talk about where's the fentanyl moving now. And it looks like the northern border is the next frontier. Back on Newsmaker in a moment. Welcome back on Newsmaker. Katarina Schultz is an independent journalist who has taken a deep dive into the world of drug cartels operating not only in Mexico, but now around the globe. Second part of our conversation. Katarina, when we went to break, we talked about where is the fentanyl coming in now. And it's looking like, as any multinational corporation would do, if business isn't good somewhere, you're going to move it somewhere else. Where is it moving?
Canada has become a hotspot for cartel associates working with domestic gangs that were already existing in Canada to move fentanyl. And it's important to keep in mind that this started, I always talk about how when the southern border kind of got locked down, there was a lot of attention there. Operations started to move up north. Great. But it's important to look back historically when marijuana was illegal. A local gang in Canada had actually started working with the Sinaloa cartel to traffic, produce, sell BC bud. It was at one point one of the most notorious and allegedly best marijuana strains to exist globally. And so this kind of started a relationship between Canadian organized crime groups and Mexican cartels. Now, when fentanyl hit the streets, this relationship absolutely blossomed due to the nature of the northern border, which is over 5,000 miles of essentially open border land. It's very easy to fly your helicopter across, back and forth, walk across, drive across, you name it. And then we have a major port in Vancouver, British Columbia, on the west coast, with a very large Asian population also helping the trafficking of fentanyl precursors from China and India. So essentially, Canada was this recipe for success for the cartels to switch their operations and work with people that they had already built a relationship with and conduct operations completely under the radar, because no one was really talking about this. I mean, when I first started talking about it, people didn't believe me. And I was showing the fentanyl labs that I was going to with members of the cartel and local organized crime groups. And it wasn't until recently when Kash Patel really said, we need to shift our focus to the northern border.
So when you've gone in and seen these labs, are they sophisticated?
They are enough to produce what the demand is for fentanyl. I mean, you're not walking into a pharmaceutical grade chemical lab, but you are walking into a lab where the people working there, know what they're doing. They have the components, they have the precursors, and they're producing this deadly drug.
Is it kind of like Breaking Bad as a visual?
I mean, I guess sure. It's like Breaking Bad. You don't just have two guys that are very you would never expect them to be working there. It's typically like what you would see in previous news stories of meth house labs and things like that.
Okay, so it's a little crude.
Yeah, and if you look back at previous police press releases, let's say in the 2010s when meth labs in homes was a huge deal, that's what you're looking at.
And that's being dotted across Canada and probably some in the U.S., in the northern parts of the U.S., right?
Yeah, certainly it is. But because of the sort of lax legal system that we have in Canada, where people aren't really, doing time for the crime, it has been much easier for them to have production all the way up north in Canada and then just distribute it amongst American networks as opposed to producing it in the United States and running that risk of being caught.
This Vancouver thing is curious because for China, it would be an easier move to move the stuff from China to Vancouver than to Mexico.
Certainly. I mean, we have this open port where less than 1% of all the cargo is being searched by authority, by the Port Authority, law enforcement, you name it. Nothing that's coming in through rail is being searched. And you have a massive Chinese population, a lot of them that are working as longshoremen, and that have already built relationships, whether they're already working in organized crime groups there, they've built relationships with the people that they need to be on their side. And so there really is just no detection. And so when I hear that number of less than 1% of fentanyl in the United States is coming in from Canada, it blows my mind because I have seen the production firsthand. I've spoken with the individuals responsible for it. And to think that it's less than 1% would just be delusional. They are running very high-level operations north of the border.
Katarina, why have the cartels ceded the precursors to China and India? Why haven't they said, we're going to make this ourselves and cut these guys out?
So that is happening. There actually was recently a New York Times report on how the Sinaloa cartel is kidnapping chemistry students from the universities to try and figure out how to make the precursors. I think that it was very easy for them at one point to purchase these precursors from chemistry labs or pharmaceutical labs that often had links to the CCP in China, bring those over and just streamline the operations. Now they are looking at cutting these people out, but it's not that simple. They need to have the perfect chemical balance, and it's not like baking a cake. Fentanyl is like baking a cake once you have the ingredients. But if you're trying to make the precursor, like say the flour for the cake from scratch, it certainly complicates the operation.
Yeah. Has the Trump administration tried to have a little chat with you about what you know?
No.
Does that worry you that they might say, hey, we need to talk? I mean, there is a First Amendment, but.
I mean, I think that they have certainly tried to reach out, but I'm not a politician. I'm not part of law enforcement. That's not my job. My job is to tell a story and ensure that my sources know that I'm just an independent journalist. And in order for my viewers to really understand where I'm coming from and know that this is completely unbiased work, I don't work with government. I don't work with law enforcement. That's not my job.
Just curious, what is the most chilling thing that the cartels have said to you that's reportable?
Perhaps not chilling, but I think that when I went to interview members of organized crime south of the border and I asked them if they thought the FTO designation was disincentivizing or what their plans were now that they're being called terrorists, and they said, well, we're just going to wait 4 years before we can bring operations back to normal. It, for me, was a little disheartening to know that, the war on drugs is never going to end.
Yeah, they're playing the long game.
Yeah, and it's been going on since before I was born. And so there is so much immense loss because of this war. And to think that, okay, we may see some positive change right now, but it's only going to last so long, it makes you think, is any of this really worth it?
Well, and the demand, I mean, if there's a demand, somebody will fill it. I'm just curious as well, we're getting short on time. The weaponry, there's been a lot of discussion about how well armed the cartels are now. We saw a little of this on the border, on the southern border, when it was really going strong. Are they preparing for some type of retaliation if the U.S. were to move on some of their labs, their people, and try to do kind of military, paramilitary operations down there?
I think that the cartels have been stockpiling weaponry for years in case of attacks from either side, whether that be the U.S., the Mexican government, or an adversary cartel. But it's certainly safe to say that these guys are ready for battle. And I mean, we've seen the type of weaponry they have. They have drone blockers, miniguns, you name it. Really, they are armed to the nth degree. And if, openly, U.S. operators were to hit Mexican soil, these guys would not go down without a fight. And, they have the means to put up a fight.
Do you believe that there are former U.S. military who might be helping train cartel members?
I have been told this before by certain cartel associates that we learned this from the gringos, something along those lines. But unfortunately, I haven't been able to go in and really verify if there have been or are, in fact, U.S. ex-military or operators that are working for what should be called their adversaries.
Katarina Schultz, independent journalist who's just done some amazing work. You can find her on Substack. Katarina, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're back in a moment on Newsmaker.